Greetings, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write for Pathos, a column called No Longer Quivering that had to do with the quiverful Evangelical movement. The same thing I'm going to be talking about a little bit here. I have been doing, let me apologize first and say I'm sorry that my other video uploaded with the sound all messed up. You just never know sometimes whether these things work or not. I was in a hurry. I did not check the audio. Big mistake. I'm not doing that again. I will always be checking the audio in anything I do. Let me say these are my opinions. They're not written in stone. If you think I've got something wrong, do your own research. I have no problem with you saying, hey, I'm wrong and I think this. And come to your own conclusions. That's really the best thing you can do. This book, however, might not be one of those things. And don't bully anybody. Don't go to Debi Pearl and start bullying her over this book, okay? The book is something else. So I have to talk a little bit about it. I have to give a thing where I'm reading and talking about what I hated about the book. Because I'm not going to lie to you, I hated this book. There are books that I read and I absolutely adore. One on psychology and brain stuff that I read was, there's been a ton of them. The Myth of Sanity was one of them, which was an interesting one. I tend to read things that have scientific studies behind them, not stuff like this. So we started last time. Debi was saying a big lie about frontal cortexes. She said this: the prefrontal cortex, the most advanced brain region, is also the most sensitive to detrimental effects of stress exposure. Even quite mild, acute, uncontrollable stress can cause a rapid and dramatic loss. Like what? Like having been so abused and used on your honeymoon that you pass out? That kind of stress? Could that kill your prefrontal cortex? Can it? As people like to say online, photos or it didn't happen. In other words, you have to be able to prove it with scientific evidence. She cites no studies. Oh, let me go back because I'm really discombobulated today. This is a review of Debi's book, Create a Better Brain Through Neuroplasticity, Debi Pearl. And Debi cites no studies or scientists or anything to claim that stress destroys prefrontal cortex tissue. While stress does have a negative effect on your brain, it's not this. And if this was true about the prefrontal cortex, Debi herself would be brain dead from the levels of stress that her husband puts her through regularly. During the marriage, from abusing her on the honeymoon, through abusing her car, little Volkswagen Beetle, and starving the family, refusing to hold a job. The list goes on and on and on and on. Okay. So what the heck is mild, acute, uncontrollable stress? Either it's mild or it's acute. It can't be described as mild acute. Not both at the same time. Stress can shrink the prefrontal cortex, but there's no evidence of some mass extinction level cell die-off like she's claiming. Debi claims that those people who are awesome musicians, scientists, anything superb in their fields, and they're seriously lacking in other areas, that there's some type of real IDIOTS. I'm not even going to say that word. I hate it. That a full life only comes from balance. It's a strange segue out of stress. And I may have covered all this in my last one. She starts babbling again about brain grooving. That is her term for the simplest of things. And she says we lose brain cells when we age. Yeah, that's true. And the importance of lifetime learning. Well, that's true too. I'm a big believer in lifetime learning, even if you're just taking a little short online course on something. So she continues on with a bunch of other fear-mongering things that she thinks shrinks your brain. She starts with a demeaning story about how thinking you are the best when you're a young person, will just croak off all of your brain cells. Just kill them all off. And I just felt so enormously angry with her reading this. It's so incredibly stupid. I feel like reading that chapter caused me to lose brain cells. I guess I would need to go play a few rounds of Candy Crush or some other game with memory boosting to get over it and shake it off. So here we go with her crazy ideas about shrinking our brain. She has this story she starts with. It's a shameful, stupid one, as usual. One of the most amazing things scientists have learned through the study of neuroplasticity is the fact that stinking thinking actually shrinks our brains. This often results in emotional disorders as well as diminished emotional and intellectual curiosity, intelligence. I take the curiosity, I added that for some reason. I don't know about stinking thinking. That sounds so silly, but I actually feel dumber just reading that. Emotions do not cause you to lose brain cells or intellect or anything else like that. And there's obviously zero scientific proof of her assertion. Notice that Debi does not give any particulars or names of studies, scientists, anything else. While stress can impact your brain cells and kill off a few, nowhere online or any medical journal or study that I've seen could I find anything about emotions killing brain cells. This is a pure Debi Pearl fiction edit. Debi illustrates her silly points with a story about a lady who was a violinist. I guess we're segueing into that from her story about musicians. Lydia Rose is in a prestigious music school set in one of the richest Jewish districts in New York. And just like that, we have subtle racism mixed in with these stupid stories. This fictional girl schemed to be a music teacher at that particular school, that prestigious school that she could not name. I don't know if it was Juilliard or if it was the one in Baltimore, the Peabody, something like that. But she doesn't say which. Called on the carpet after 2 weeks of teaching for failing to follow curriculum. They canned her, as well they should if they had strict rules about curriculum that she was refusing to follow. Lydia gets lectured and finally leaves, heartbroken. Then Debi lobs this bomb. Believing you are the best while still young can sometimes be detrimental. Being put in a position of authority where you feel superior is equally damaging when you are put down by those who do not value your brilliance. I feel like rolling on the floor and laughing at this one. Just laughing. Debi just literally described her husband and his entire work history by changing sexes and occupations. Another passive-aggressive swipe at Mikey. It sounds like stinking thinking from here. Another Debi quote. You can make yourself feel worse almost immediately by dwelling on the worst possible outcome of a situation. Well, yes and no. Let me give you some practical advice on this one, because Debi will not do it. It's normal to sometimes think the worst possible outcome to think about. It's normal. It's normal. We all do it. And how you would handle it. But there's a line some of us cross and we get stuck obsessing about it. And sometimes it's very healthy. An example of that was a girl named Tara, who is the daughter of the Deborah who was featured on Dear John, the Netflix show. That little girl loved the same show that my youngest loves, which is The Walking Dead. And she spent so much time thinking about zombies and watching this show that she thought about in great detail what she would do if there was ever a zombie attack. So when her mother's con man husband tried to attack and kill Tara, she went ham on him. She killed him. She killed him because she thought about this so much. So she did the same attack on him that she would have done on a zombie. Poor old girl thought about it. And she was like a 100-pound little girl, maybe like 18, 19, 20 years old, very young. And this was a grown man in his 40s. It was 200 plus pounds, and she killed him. And while I'm not a fan of violence, if you're fighting for your life, mess him up good. And she did. She stuck the knife right through his eyeball. She reached that opinion of what she should do by watching the Grateful Dead, The Walking Dead. I've got Grateful Dead on the brain because my husband was wearing his Grateful Dead t-shirt yesterday and people were asking him about it. So that is one use of thinking about those things in detail. I tend to be the 2 a.m. warrior. I'm a little bit different. Jolted awake from a sound sleep by a brain that says, hey, worry about this thing right now. I'm just hardwired that way. I always have been. It's not lack of brain cells, death of brain cells, or anything else. I've learned that for me, the most effective way to deal with a 2 a.m. worry is to do something I picked up from a Stephen King book of all things, from Dr. Sleep, which is a pretty horrific movie and book. I imagine a safe or a strong lockbox in my mind. I visualize myself shoving that thing that is worrying me into the box, spinning the locking dial, and pushing it way out of sight, pushing it out. It works for me. I have other techniques, but everybody has to find what works for them to turn their mind off when it will do crazy things. Then Debbie blames serotonin flooding Lydia's body for being such a happy-nosed snot. Stupid babbling about other neurotransmitters being deployed and killing off brain cells. Good grief. Debbie claims if you keep thinking on these bad things, more of the brain killing voodoo keeps happening. No such thing. Debbie babbles also about impulse control. And I can't even start to make sense of this horrific word salad she says here. Christians have always known by experience that mental health issues can be managed, if not cured, by an infusion of God's forgiveness and obedience to the principles of Scripture. If there was ever an evil, body count making, horrific statement in Christendom, it's this. This one has a body count. It's the most dangerous piece of theology I've ever read, and it has a huge body count. If we had to keep following this old nonsense of the old church, my husband himself would be dead right now from his tumor instead of tumor-free and happy like he is now. He had a parathyroid tumor that was pushing him to have a depression. If you are depressed, I beg you to start with a complete physical from a competent medical doctor. Start there and nowhere else, and then listen to the doctor and go from there. No matter how Debbie and other cultural enforcers whinge on about it it's all being godly enough and choosing happiness. It's also an established fact that antidepressant use is so much higher in religious communities, especially religious communities that are extremely conservative. It's very high across the board. It doesn't even matter what kind of religion it is. How's that God-trusting thing working out? Not very well, it seems, in those communities. There's no shame in seeking help. There's no shame in taking psychotropic drugs at all, taking any kind of appropriate medications to help with a condition you may have. You wouldn't shame a diabetic for needing insulin or a heart patient for their nitroglycerin pills, would you? She's blaming the depressed for their own depression, which is pretty heinous if you ask me. Debbie quotes some very old doctors and talks about how depression drugs incarcerate your mind. And only the most harmful of folks should do that. Then she goes on to claim that Christianity invented mindfulness as a way out of depression. I got to grab my notebook here because after I did this, I started doing some research on where mindfulness came from. The first references to mindfulness or anything even remotely like it were over 2,500 years old that had to do with Buddhism. And John Kabat-Zinn of the University of Massachusetts started using it routinely in 1979. He was involved with Buddhism and yoga. So Debbie saying that Christianity invented it is ridiculous. She goes on to claim that Christians invented mindfulness as a way out of depression decades ago. Nope, nope, nope. As I just proved it came out way before Christ. Debbie goes back, circling around again to blame all mental illness on, quote, stinking thinking, before returning to Lydia Rose and her bragging on social media. Debbie claims that throws Lydia into the stinking thinking loop of mental illness creation. So if I'm getting this right, you're not allowed to think too highly of yourself. You're not allowed to think negatively at all, and all of that can cause stinking thinking. Okay. When I'm reading this, I am having thoughts of a song from the Book of Mormon musical called Making Things Up Again, Arnold, that summarizes the entire next chapter of this whole book. Debbie's stinking thinking. Debbie is beating up on her fictional Lydia Rose, blaming her and claiming that she merrily killing off all her brain cells. And we start with blaming others instead of taking that shame on yourself. I'll agree with Debbie that there are people who will never take responsibility for a darn thing, and that really inhibits them in their entire lives. It gives them not anything good coming up. It doesn't work. You need to be able to take responsibility when you've done something wrong. Okay, so how are you holding up? We're having, it looks like there's another epidemic of coronavirus going through. And when I originally wrote this, it was during the initial lockdown of COVID. So I was asking a lot of people how they dealt with that, looking through my notes. So are we still thinking this is a thing? Are we holding up? Because here we are, and it's still going strong out there. So remember that Lydia got canned from her job? She does not call her mom, but she calls her little sister and Debbie waxes rhapsodic about mom and dad, how dad could support Lydia and how mama was not going to allow her to spin around in self-pity. Who's Debbie kidding here? The range of reactions parents will give over tragedies in the lives of children vary as much as anything else. For all Debbie knows, they could be coddling and enabling this bad behavior of blaming and not taking any kind of real responsibility for your actions. Debbie claims mama's questions and pointing out of flaws stops that nasty cortisol and rushes in to save the day from Lydia's brain cells croaking off like so many cheap goldfish at a carnival midway. Okay, Debbie quote, hard truth. In our society, being kind is paramount, often to our detriment. Dear Debbie, have you looked at Reddit lately? That seems to be where kindness goes to die, okay? And I can tell you, as somebody who is disabled, who has to use assistive devices, the level of people out there who are kind has gone way, way down. And I have recently been confronting people who are parking in the handicap space, blocking me from parking there when there's no other spaces. So I think that kindness is probably more needed, not less needed, as you're trying to claim here. And I'm trying to do that myself instead of rushing. I'm going, why are you parking in the handicap spot? I need that handicap spot. Hey, are you aware that this is a handicap spot? I'm not trying to. Anyway, Debbie goes on to claim that enablers only help us kill off our brain cells with unearned kindness. Kindness is killing off brain cells. Oh, Lord. I feel like writing this long list of all the crap Debbie is blaming for killing off brain cells. She claims we need hard truth instead. Dear Debbie, up yours. Sometimes when things are tough or we're going something super traumatic, we need those around us just to love us kindly through our pain. That is not enabling, but much of Debbie's reactions to Mike and her marriage that she has documented on her website are enabling. So don't listen to this woman about what enabling is, because she didn't have a clue. If you have a loved one who falls into discouraged sadness and ugly rage, or is in a state of bitterness, blaming others for messing up their life, don't coddle or talk away their pain. Absolutely talk to that family member. Get them to see a doctor for a physical and or a licensed counselor for everything else. Don't leave them stuck in this thing. Don't try Debbie's toxic tough love here, because it benefits no one. If you want them better, you must do something to make that happen sometimes. You are setting them up for depression, violence, and or a lifetime of sickness and mental decline. Is that what happened with Michael to cause him to be a violent child, prone to nonsensical rantings and whines? The kindest thing one can do when a family member is suffering from these issues is to get outside help and treat that person with as much kindness as you can muster. You don't know what they're going through in their mind. Now we move yet again to the gut-brain connection that Debbie loves so much. It makes no sense to anybody else but Debbie. Autoimmune diseases can take hold when a person's immune system is compromised by long-term stress or bitterness. You know, I've searched online and sites on health and research sites. The only thing even slightly like what she's saying involves the bitterness receptors on your tongue, tasting bitterness, tasting sweetness, bitterness, whatever, and inflammation. There is literally not one piece of science to back up what she's claiming here. She's making it up again, Debbie. Sometimes memory is downright creative. Not as creative as her imagination here. She makes gut claims, talks about obsessive thoughts, calling them, quote, looping, and claims that stinking thinking programs in what sounds like false memories, or at least memories self-edited to make you always right. Okay, I have to talk about this, and I may ramble because I have not taken notes on this, but she's talking about your immune system being compromised when you don't think the right thoughts. That is a bunch of baloney if there ever was one. And it blames the people who are suffering from autoimmune illnesses for their own illnesses, and that's just wrong. Nobody really knows why some of these things happen. You know, the one I have is clearly genetically linked. We've been able to look back at the family on my father's side, and it's genetically linked. It's just there. And saying that it happened because of stinking thinking is just stupid. While obsessive looping thoughts are not helpful for anyone, there are ways to deal with this that do not involve Debbie's biblical voodoo blaming. The rest sounds so fishy from here, what she says. And, you know, the thing with fake memories and with memories that are not quite the same, it's an important survival tool to cope with life, super trauma, or we disengage, and we sometimes will not just disengage, we will become almost catatonic and put something different there so that while we're undergoing the trauma, we're not experiencing it, we're somewhere else. That goes on too, and she doesn't even begin to realize that that is something that happens when you start experiencing very horrible abuse, that you will become completely divorced from yourself in that moment. And it's normal, very normal. Natural networks in the brain make our brains stronger and more resilient than anything she's saying here. Debi claims that looping just keeps reinforcing negative emotions and that those negative emotions start diminishing the brain. Our brains physically diminish in size as we stew, rage, and mope. Bigger is better. Choose happiness, forgiveness, and gratefulness. While it is better in some ways to choose to be grateful, even when there's not a lot to be grateful for, to keep short offense lists, to forgive as you can and not to worry too much about anything going on. It has been proven to help people's overall mental status, but it doesn't mean that you have to do that. There are some times where sitting with something and doing what she calls stew, rage, mope is actually an appropriate emotional range. It doesn't kill your brain. She's wrong. This is all followed by claims that talk therapy with a counselor just destroys your brain again because you keep rehashing your issues. Not true. Debi just wants to shut up and shut down those that do not think like her, like many people try to do in Fundy Town. It's just this thing they keep doing, and it's awful. Speaking about people emotionally stuck in their childhood or teenage years, quote, and in their youth, they hated or resented someone, damaging their prefrontal cortex. Oh, Lord. And we're right back in Debi's lies about looping or obsessive thoughts. She cites a study from 1921 as proof. The study indicates that those who are always happy have the longest, most satisfying lives. They don't get bitter or sad. Whatever, Debi. All of us can clearly see the dysfunctional hot mess of your life and see what a lie all of this is. Her own life story, if you read her own writings, is filled with rage, bitterness, insanity, and resentments. Okay, and the next part I have to talk about a little bit because I've done a ton of research on this because I was very interested when the book Concussion came out. And when I later saw the movie, okay, about brain trauma in the NFL. Okay, my husband is in there right now worshiping at the altar of the NFL. Brain traumas or not. Okay, so this is something I've been super interested in, particularly after I had my first little TIA stroke. And we experienced the recovery, which if you have something go haywire with your brain like that, like a mini stroke or damage or whatever, it could take you 6 months to regain your strength. There is a fatigue beyond a fatigue from a brain injury. I'm just going to throw that out. Oh, so Debi is using a story about a black walnut boinking somebody in the head that caused a concussion. That must have been one huge ass walnut. That's all I've got to say. Weird talk from Hooterville. Debi and Shoshana. Shoshana is her daughter. Shoshana Easling, who is divorced now, I believe. And Shoshana sells herbs, okay. They share how to stay healthy from the coronavirus. They insert that in there. I'll spare you actually having to read the damn thing. It's garlic. Lots and lots and lots of garlic. It makes about as much sense as this stupid book. Garlic is good for you, and there are some good uses for it, but coronavirus avoidance is not one of them. They at least gave a disclaimer about how they aren't real doctors, just medical researchers. Debbie says that letting your kids play outside with other kids is the way to go to avoid COVID. Debbie also says you'll get 5 days of dry cough before the virus really kicks in. And breathing through a wet wash rag, largely useless information that has nothing to do with avoiding COVID or working it out. Garlic can work as a low-level antibiotic. I take it for all my sinus infections. Thank you, Cindy Kunzman. But in a capsule form and in much higher doses than what herbalist Shoshana is recommending here. I do 8 to 10,000 milligram capsules every 4 hours when I have a sinus infection. Knock on wood, I've had almost none this year. They are also recommending standard supplements for everyone, promoting vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc. Not bad for you. Now I'm back onto the main part of this ridiculous book. Earlier, before my little COVID break, I was talking about stinking thinking. We're on to a chapter about concussions. I don't know how many of you actually saw the movie Concussion or read the series of articles that the movie is based upon, but it's an eye-opening look at how horribly the NFL hid the long-term consequences of repeated concussions in their players. They did their guys a horrible, horrible thing. Many of the players have developed some form of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and it has wrecked many of their lives. Look, I'm not going to do like Debbie and break down what a concussion actually is. We all know what a concussion is, I'm going to assume, how it happens, or what the symptoms are here. We're all adults. We can all Google this crap. And with the NFL and CTE in the news so often, I think it's pretty safe to assume we all know what it is. Particularly now when the NFL actually has like little medical huts on the sidelines where they evaluate guys they think may have gotten a concussion, which is a step forward. It's not the biggest step forward they could have made, but it's a better one than what they were doing. Look, I'm not going to do like Debbie and break down all of that. Debbie spends 6 pages yammering on and on and on, trying to explain what a concussion is and how it happens. Okay, here we go. Debbie again. The best thing to do for a concussion is to avoid activities that are likely to cause them. Thank you, Captain Obvious. I salute you. This is all followed by one of her beta editors for this stupid book talking about her own concussions. Car wreck, boinked on the head by a walnut. Seriously, a walnut? Was it being shot out of a cannon or a grenade launcher? Okay, Debbie quote. Not Debbie quote, editor quote. If I could go back and do life over, I would study some kind of brain something. I am sorry, but this seriously sounds like there's more at play here than car wrecks and walnut boinkings. She goes on to claim that postmenopausal women are always more emotional after a pile of TBI or traumatic brain injuries. She repeats the brainstem lie that Debbie pushes about Dr. Paul Bach-Irita, his father, as giving her hope that she could recover from the walnut on her noggin. Doctor and QEEG later shows that parts of her brain are malfunctioning. You think? Reams of pages about her feelings and her mood swings because she got hit on the head. Debbie has no suggestions for any of this or what to do with your kids if you think they may have gotten boinked on the head by a walnut. Nothing. Denana zippity doo-dah. Nothing. So then we move on to mindfulness. Mindfulness. And I just actually was talking about that just a few minutes ago. She's already half-ass covered this in previous chapters. I think she's as bored with this book as I am. So there was a screen cap when I was doing this. First look at this book at the top of the No Greater Joy page, an open defiance of Governor Bill Lee's mandatory mandate that everybody stay home. They violated it pretty seriously. Why would we expect them to comply with the law? The last time I checked, mailing out books on beating your children is not a necessary business like being a first responder or working in a grocery store. The difference with Lee's edict is that he also has authorized law enforcement to do what they need to do to enforce it. Unlike Ohio with the Rodriguez family, who were tromping around, singing and performing during the mandatory lockdowns. These people. So Debbie goes with a harsh of lies about so many things here. And we've already seen her tiny knowledge about concussions. Now we need to see what she thinks about mindfulness. Here's a clue. It's not what she says it is. She opens yet again with a misunderstanding about how hormones and neurotransmitters work in our body, claiming yet again that your thoughts cause your body to release hormones that destroy your brain. We unknowingly release harsh neurochemicals, neurotransmitters. We allow our minds to be caught up in stinking thinking. First, there's no such thing as harsh neurotransmitters. Even the ones that come into play during bad times also have roles to play in good times and in daily life. Second, as we've covered before, this is not how our bodies work. Our thoughts do not force our body to do evil or wrong or go evil and wrong. Now, as I've stated before, your thoughts going dark or angry can actually be a sign that something else is going haywire physically in your body. Debbie has it backwards. What do I mean? I'll explain a tiny bit. Okay. Earlier in the week, I had a morning, I'm trying to find something here, where I was out of sorts and crying for no reason. And when that happens, it behooves me to pull out this little device and check. Let's see if it'll measure me. Come on. Where are you taking forever? Okay, my blood oxygen levels are normal for me, 97. That's actually pretty good. Oh crap, I'm talking, it went down to 95. Oh well. So I did this and discovered that my oxygen level was actually 92, 91. So that's where I started having problems, and that's where the emotions came in. The emotions were merely a flag to let me know that something was wrong, and the wrong was I had asthma coming on. Sometimes when the oxygen levels tank, I need to know it. It is a sign. It's a sign that something is going wrong. It's not my thoughts causing my brain to die like she's trying to claim. She rambles on about her friend that destroyed her gut bacteria and health by worrying, and her mama winking at her daddy's verbal abuse of everybody in the household, claiming mama was just releasing, quote, happy neurotransmitters by doing that in the face of abuse. If a man yells at you like that, clearly there is abuse going on, and I am not down with that. Debbie excuses her father's poor behavior. His abuse of all of them is a, quote, lack of self-control. So now we see how and why she hooked up with Michael, because insane, ranting, demanding men, they're just what she's used to dealing with. That sucks. Horrible Debbie quote. We can choose to wink as my mother did. We can choose to forgive. We can choose to relax. We can decide to stop our stinking thinking sounds like something else. Stinking thinking into a productive stream. When our minds choose a peaceful direction, the neurotransmitters that are released reflect that choice and reinforce the mood, making our peace and our joy stronger. Yeah, that's what living a life in denial is like. Literally not true. Well, it can be helpful not to focus on something else when stressed out. It's not going to release a pile of anything. Like we discussed many times in earlier chapters, this is literally not how hormones or neurotransmitters work at all. Debbie uses this as a springboard to blame people who are suffering from depression for their own depression, calling it stinking thinking yet again, instead of looking at the whole forest of causes for depression and anxiety that actually do drive depression. Then she says this about all that controlling your thinking. The new science is called mindfulness. Now, remember earlier I said that mindfulness goes back at least 2,500 years to Buddhism and yoga. She's trying to claim it's a new thing. Mindfulness is not a science. It's not any of the things that she's got outlined in her book. But she starts out babbling about how mindfulness helped Mike to become a world famous champion knife thrower. Pages and pages and literal pages of this crap about this hateful, childish baby man becoming the world champ. Sigh. Oh my goodness. He beat those knives on his forge. He acts right to get his gut brain the right feels. He took his stupid supplements. Yes, and she sprinkles in the names of neurotransmitters that played a part in his win. Again, not scientifically provable or probative. Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Did you hear that? That makes my neurotransmitters happy. The sound of birds. Going to my bird feeder, that does it for me. Her claims get very ridiculous here. But knife throwing is good for more than the fun of the sport. It also increased his mind power. His IQ is higher. What, did you get my IQ test before and afters? I don't think so. Another case of photos, or in this case, before and after IQ tests, or didn't happen. What else is Debbie blaming the world for ruining folks' brain? Just the usual stuff. Today's world filled with noisy music leaves us so rattled instead of exalted. Raunchy TV corrupts the spirit. Filthy porn gives birth to a demon so demanding that eventually a man will lust after his own flesh and blood. What the heck does any of this have to do with the practice of mindfulness? Not a damn thing. But I'm not sure how exactly Debbie defines the word. She never really comes up with a real definition for it. She babbles on and on about mirror neurons and culture wrecking people's brains and the need to get back to a life filled with gratitude. Brains. I feel like a zombie at this point. She thinks this old hymn sums it all up, reflecting mindfulness. Count your many blessings. Name them one by one. Again, not entirely how mindfulness works, not at all. Another Debbie quote. A candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. Could aptly apply to our vagus nerve, the connector between our brain and our gut. Oh, Lordy, Lord have mercy. I'm going to need a brain transfusion or transplant or maybe just a sweet, sweet brain nap in a few minutes. I got to finish up with this mindfulness crap. And then I will come back next week and finish this up. Debbie doesn't even explain what she meant with that crap about candles, just leaving that nonsensical sentence hanging out there by itself. Then she moves on to applying mindfulness to childbirth, claiming that controlling her mind, her labor only took 15 minutes, or felt like it only took 15 minutes, and there was almost no pain. I'm not believing her there. Not at all. Mindfulness and meditation have a place in childbirth and other circumstances, but so much of this chapter is just silly bragging. This is too. She goes on to claim if you have painful periods, you should skip the liver damaging Tylenol and only do meditation. I'm guessing she's about to tell that to the OxyContin addicts out there, that the pain was just in their minds. Using mindfulness to take control of your pain, fear, anxiety, and lack of sleep, anger, and any other troubling issues is just smart. It would have been a heck of a lot smarter had Debbie actually explained what she thought mindfulness is instead of all this crazy blaming over thoughts. Here is what conventional wisdom says about mindfulness in a nutshell. Mindfulness is a psychological process of purposely bringing one's attention to experiences occurring in the present moment without judgment, which one develops through the practice of meditation and through training. Did you catch that? Without judgment. That rules Debbie completely out of this whole thing. Every place I could find on mindfulness explained it that way, almost to a letter. Debbie never defines it once in this whole stupid book what she considers mindfulness to be, beyond being grateful and killing off stinking thinking. Okay, and we are currently about 80% through this book. Lord of mercy. And I have to dip out because it is killing my brain cells. Killing them dead, 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 and dead. So I will be back next Friday with the finishing up piece. I've got to finish this crap up. I remember towards the end, it is just a summary. So we're going to skip all of that part. We're only going to do this stuff like this. If you can hit like, subscribe, press the bell notification on your way out, I would be very grateful. Comment. That would be good. As you hear, my notifications are going off like crazy yet again, so I can check. Hopefully this worked. I hope so. I'm going to test it before I upload it. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your weekend.